This is number 2 for today. I'll be heading out in a few minutes. But I was working on the regular teaching one. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about all of these things that you see me talk about. And what I saw, after the history of all this, that there was criminal acts when you assault people, which took place multiple times, and in official capacity, meaning they were on the job, and as far as I know, still on the job. And these were targeted assaults, had nothing to do with arrest, nothing to do, all of this, and people got used to it. And when I realized that the supervisory level of CCPD was very aware of all this, and they kind of tried to say, well, tone it down to people on the job that were officers, still are. And to say, so they had the acknowledgement of felony crimes, which were the ones I reported, that took place over the years here. And they knew this. Within fire departments as well as police departments, what you have is unions, okay? I was a union member for all the years I was at the fire department. Well, a few years I quit the union. There's a lot of politics. Unions, what they do, one of the disagreements some of us had with the unions was if we had a firefighter that called in sick and didn't show up for work, and the other guy, okay, so if the supervisor wanted to, the chief of the fire department wanted to discipline one of the firefighters, and you knew he wasn't doing his job, the union's job was to back him up. That was the union's job if he was a union member. We were supposed to even do it for non-union members, but primarily if you got a union member, the immediate thing is a defense. Now, when you have in policing, I could give you many cases I talked about. There was a case of an officer, it's Texas, not Corpus Christi, but he had killed, I think he killed 2 or 1 person. He was at a bar one night. This was in maybe Dallas. But anyway, they did an expose on it in the newspapers because he got out of the bar and there was a scuffle ensued, and he took his service revolver. He was off duty, and I believe he murdered 2 people. Okay. It's kind of, well, when it went before the grand jury, this is Texas now, the grand jury, and the officer maybe shows up in uniform, and the average belief is like, surely. Now, the union defended this officer, and they said before the grand jury that he was not drunk. He was not drunk, he was not. But then later, the reason the paper exposed it was they lied. He actually was drunk. And then they said, but wait a minute, you knew he was drunk. But the union represented him almost like a defense and said, well, this was the police department in that locality that lied in defense of a cop who shot, I think he killed 2. And then they later said he was legally drunk. So what you find, and what I've seen in many of the experiences I had, the reason the civilian population learned, particularly in Corpus Christi, with the ones I'm familiar with, they learned that that's what you're dealing with. That even if you had it, there was finally a cop. Chief Simpson was a good chief, and it's very sad that he died. But there was a cop that got disciplined under Chief Simpson because they had video. If you don't have video of a murder or a cop committing a murder, or you will never, and the in-house could know that maybe an officer just went out and killed somebody. But when they all work together, the normal process would be maybe a citizen. I'm sure the parents of the man that was killed by CCPD, this was in front of Paris Apartments. I'm sure they're very upset that their son was murdered. Witnesses said, yes, they choked him in the back of the cop car and he died. Now, the medical examiner, from what the people have said, and this I've heard many times, that the medical examiner ruled it as an asthma attack. No. At the fire department in Kingsville, I remember when I was new at the job, there were many, whenever the cops went and made an arrest, we'd get called, the fire or ambulance crew would get called, and there were a few occasions where the person that was arrested had died. And one of my supervisors, I won't tell his name, he was captain, I think, or he was one of the supervisors. He was there. He had seniority when I got hired back in 1983. And I remember we went to Iran and the guy was coded. And it was an arrest. And I thought, oh, so we did the CPR and everything. I mean, he died. And the supervisor at the fire department, many years ago, he said, oh, they're killing these guys, John. And I didn't, he said the cops. Now, not on purpose in those cases, but you had maybe 4 or 3 officers on top of him. Much like the Eric Garner type situation. When you have a person that's under arrest and you're on top of him, they just can't breathe. And then my friend had told me, no, a lot of the deaths are, they're restrained the guys, maybe choke them or on top of them, the person can't breathe and he dies. But what happens is in many of those cases they had drugs in their system, maybe they were high, and the medical examiner will always rule, like, well, okay, he had drugs in his system or whatever. But my friend told me, and I learned later, a lot of them were dying just because you're choking them. Now, so in many cases they got away with murder. In this county, you had within the public official records, this came out in media, this came out in papers, of medical examiners changing by the former DA. What they should have done with Mark Skirka was put a notice not to destroy any records of criminality that he was involved in, but they didn't do any of that. And I because he's so ingrained with, he's friends with the police chief, I wouldn't doubt it that they'll go and retaliate. Mr. Rosas case, which I discussed, which made it to national media, instead of acknowledging, they shot he was just a man at his home taking care of his elderly mother, disabled mother. And the cops had a warrant for a relative in the home, so they shot the flash bomb into his house and then went in. And this made it to national media. But Mr. Rosas was advised by Judge Guy Williams to, he'd have to maybe sue Mark Skirka. The judge was basically saying, you have a criminal case, but it's a civil case because they should have done some type of legal action on Skirka to not destroy, to not go out and... But Mr. Skirka believed, and the cops that were involved in other criminal activities, they just think that's kind of like okay of what went on and what goes on. I've watched a case of, there are many cases, the Michael Morton case. He was framed for killing his wife. He never killed her, and when they found out, as years went by, DNA evidence showed that they had this man in prison falsely for maybe 25 years or whatever. But the prosecutors, when they realized, I think the prosecutor's Terry Anderson, he realized he didn't want to let the guy out. They'd prefer to him not to look bad on them. But they don't view that as basically you kidnapped that man for 30 years. But if you use false testimony, and we have a kid in jail right now on this, and the courts even sent it back, and everybody knew. And Mr. Skirka thinks by having a detective force a man Valent to lie in order to frame the kid, and they don't see that. They think, well, we did our job. They don't see that as this. I had the friends over the years tell me, you know, John, when they stop us for nothing, you know, just, we're going to arrest you today. And they've said, the cops have said that here to these guys over the years. I'll just arrest you without cause. I reported it. I gave it. There was a death threat made by an officer to Albert Hoffman. And they would tell him, you know, if you don't disappear, I'll make you disappear. John, did you report it? Yes, Nelda Martinez, I believe, got that letter. And what do when they hear that officers threaten to kill people in Corpus? They go after the people that reported it. That's what they do here. Now, my friend laughed about it, you know, because the officer said, if you don't disappear, I'll make you disappear. And then somebody died under that officer. And then that's... But the unions, see, when I realized that they all knew what was going on here, so to me, that's absolutely criminal. It's an emergency, as in if you actually, when you have these people under false pretense sitting in prison, like you have the Gaetan, I consider that kidnapping. You say, well, that's your view, John. Just because we lied, suborned perjury, and we targeted you, and we targeted other people, and actually murdered, because that case in front of the Paris Apartments, the witnesses said he was killed. That's what the witnesses told me. It's an older case. And you say, yeah, but that's what we do. We get away with all that. I consider that criminal. I consider that criminal. Even that lady at the flea market, to be afraid to talk on video because she said she was harassed for about 7 years. I consider that criminal, what you do. Those that engage in that. I don't see it as a slight. When you followed me all over the place, putting notice, and then I knew that you actually targeted people, and they knew, the CCPD knew, wasn't an arrest. You went and friends of that CCPD officer often told me, oh no, he'll go and take his uniform off and assault you. Like, they bragged about it. Not to me, but assault me, but that cops on the beat had a history of, if they had any altercation with a street guy, they thought, well, if I just take the uniform off, then later I'll go and we'll do an assault on you, which took place under the Stripes cameras to one of my friends. And I thought, surely the senior chiefs and everybody, surely they don't know this is going on. No, they knew. They knew. And the way they dealt with it was like, you know, don't be assaulting, don't you be jumping, mugging. That's felonies. That's assault and battery. And if you had the weapon on them, assault with a deadly weapon. And they knew it. That's why Skirka, he's kind of like, the cases that you should have come out and said, no, the black man that was on death row for all those years, it's one of the many famous cases. And they were still trying to put him to death. And then later they knew, oh, it was the wrong guy. And finally there was a prosecutor, this is a famous case this last year, because I saw him come out on the news. But finally a prosecutor who prosecuted one of the black men that was sitting in prison for 30 years and on death row, he finally came out and realized, no, when he lied in the particular cases, he realized that because his testimony, suborning of it or using false testimony, he realized that was criminal what he did. This is in a national case. You had I just saw it again on TV just maybe last night, but there was a young kid in New York City. This is another documentary, but he was accused, he was a black boy. He was accused of stealing a backpack from another school student. He was a minor, I think he was 15. So the cops arrested him, and they just wanted him to admit you stole the backpack. And the boy said, well, I didn't steal the backpack. They put that kid in Rikers Island prison in New York, and they held him for 3 years. And his parents, and they said, no, you're going to admit it whether you like it or not. He said, but I didn't steal the backpack. So now he was in Rikers for 3 years. There was even a video of him being assaulted by a guard. This is 15 or 16. And then he got out, and he finally committed suicide. The power that people have when you're in your official capacity, and especially if you're doing stuff like that, to me, none of that is a joke. I consider every day any of the cases, that Hannah Overton, I consider the people that did that under false testimony and then retaliated against other prosecutors here in Oasis County that came out. You had multiple cases and where prosecutors later came out, and this was all in public. It made it to the governor of Texas, I think Perry at the time. And this all came out like, we're sorry, we did lie, we did destroy evidence. All of that is criminal. Because certain people went away for many years, the famous case of Carlos de Luna, if he was truly innocent, well, that would be murder. And the detectives, the CCPD at that time, gave false testimony in court. Books are written on that. Because the other person who more than likely committed the murder, this Corpus Christi murder, was named Carlos Hernandez, and the police in court here, this is many years ago, said there was no such Carlos Hernandez. But later on, Carlos Hernandez was actually an informant for CCPD, so they kind of covered for him. But then he bragged that he was the murderer until the last day, until they executed De Luna. Even though at that stage, CCPD back then knew they might have had an innocent man, they'd prefer him to die. Now, if all of that's true, meaning De Luna didn't do the killing, and then you put him to death, some Christians and pastors think, well, that was the process. No, but it came out that detectives lied in order to get a death penalty on Mr. De Luna. Say, well, yeah, maybe they lied. That's equal to, in the eyes of God, that's murder. You say, I was just reading on Pilate or teaching Acts. And Peter is rebuking, this is the Acts 3 one that's going to come up, and Peter is rebuking them and says, no, you gave voice, his fellow brethren, he's saying at the crucifixion, he says, you gave voice to execute Jesus. And Peter says, when Pilate was willing to let him go. So what they did was, in any case where somebody is falsely held, and you have people right now, cases that went to higher courts in Texas that were exposed in the media here, that it was through lying and false testimony. You have cases of covering up criminal activity by officers. All of this is a severe emergency to me, equal to if you kidnapped a person. You see, if you held a Mr. Morton for 25 years and then realized you were hiding evidence, Terry Anderson, I think, was the prosecutor in that case, and now you're thinking, oh no, I'm going to keep that man in prison or even execute a black man, which is another death row case. You seem to think if you did it through your official capacity, but you swore under oath, you swore in the name of God in a court of law, but you gave false testimony and suborned it, you think, well, okay, we got caught. I won't answer the media's questions. But now life goes on. No, you're just as guilty as a kidnapping, because you used false testimony to hold that man. I had a friend of mine, homeless here, who's never in trouble, by the way. Not alcohol problem, really. But he told me one day, oh, the cops put the cuffs on me. I was surprised. It's Henry. Henry is not alcohol, not, he's just a good man. But he wanted to tell me. I said, well, this was a few years ago. I said, but why? He wanted me to hear it first. He just came out of HEB and Maybe somebody had complained that somebody was asking for money or whatever. But when they came up to my friend Henry, he said, no, it wasn't Henry. He doesn't do that. He doesn't ask for money. But he questioned, why are you going to put the cuffs on me? And immediately they said, we can't. They put the cuffs on him, and just basically they could have let that rise to, oh, you resisted arrest. Could have ended up in shooting him and simply saying, oh, he was, but for no cause. Because of all the stories that are verified, the ones that I know for a fact, and for that to have gone on, and for the local community, thankfully we had Mark Gonzalez in. I'm going to go out in a few minutes. I had to review my other teaching video that I'll get up tomorrow on local church. But I consider even the death of an innocent man on death row, I consider that murder. And in the eyes of God, it certainly is murder. If you use false testimony to have someone executed just because the state carried it out, if you were involved in dissimulation, that's a crime. That's so criminal. There should have been an immediate order on the former DA. Do not destroy any records. Do not destroy any conversations you had, any collusion. This came out in court because it went before Judge Nanette Hassett. He retaliated against, I think his female prosecutor was Rita Cobley, but he retaliated, Mrs. Skirka retaliated, which is criminal. But he did it, this came out in official records. And then because she was going to give certain evidence in a Hayden case where they had they pressured, Mr. Skirka pressured the medical examiner to change his testimony in a shooting case, which Mr. Skirka said, yes, we're going to let it, we did wrong, we're going to retry her, but then out of spite he said, no, now we're going to challenge it. Let that lady stay. The same thing with the Hannah Overton. Instead of admitting wrong and saying, we should really be after people that are shooting drive-bys instead of women that are adopting children. No, he made it look like to him, but they lied, they hid evidence, and it came out that crimes were committed. And now they're saying, well, see, it's fixed now. No, you got to go back. You can't raise DeLuna from the dead, but it's very possible you have that man's blood on your hands. And the woman that he was put to death for killing, if he did not kill her, her blood is also on your hands. Because you purposefully dissimulated in an Oasis County court in a case that made it again to national news. I consider what they do in these particular things as highly criminal, besides all the other things. And I don't see it as sort of like if you had a firefighter that wasn't doing his job, which I'm kind of familiar with the union and the way, and then the union is protecting him because he's not showing up. But what they did here was protected some of these other things that were well known. And I was shocked when I realized they knew crimes were being committed in particular instances. And they had full awareness that crimes were committed by people within CCPD, which was an assault and battery case I shared many times. And I thought, no, you don't let that go. The woman that was shot, the Catholic lady from the flea market, you should have, if there's credence to which he said, but there must have been because Judge Tom Greenwell let her out and you wanted to try her, I guess, on attempted murder of a public servant, the same thing you did with Rosas. And when the national media looked at that, they all agreed that was oppressive what you did to that man. You should have had Rosas was the bombing case where the cop shot the bomb into the house. You should have said, looked at it later, And you had certain officers lying in that case, but there were some honest officers. Because I heard what the lady in the jury said. When they acquitted Rosas, you tried to, Skirka also broke rules there because right at the end of the trial, he dropped for it from 7 counts of attempted capital murder to like assault of a peace officer, but the jury didn't buy any of it. I heard one of the ladies, the jury said, oh, you could tell they were lying. But she said, but there were some cops that were on the stand in that case that didn't want to lie. She said you could tell they were telling the truth. But Skirka and the other ones, that's criminal. That's criminal. Why do you think, Mr. Skirka, it's any different than if somebody did that to your family member, gave false testimony and had a family member of yours maybe go to prison for life? Why do you think that? Because they're Mexican? Do you deem them less because Gaitan's Mexican and he had tattoos? And you figured that that didn't matter? That he was less of a human because he was Hispanic? I can't figure how you could do that with a clear conscience. Okay, that's what I want you to see. That to me, I don't see any of those cases you see. Look, I pray for all these cases. I got a lot of names up here. I got Mr. Floyd Simpson still there because I pray for his wife. She had some difficulty, Tanya. You say, is that all? Yes, that's all I'm going to do until feds come in and do equal to what they did in Ferguson. I have a friend of mine. I don't want to go long because I need to go somewhere. I have a friend of mine who writes for the Chicago Sun-Times. You know, he texts, I'm in touch with friends from other places of the country. He told me that the federal authorities are fully aware and been tracking what's going on, particularly in Flower Bluff. That's what he told me. He sent me a text. And he said that they're gonna do maybe a federal thing here with local law enforcement. Now, whether that's going to come to pass or not, that was a text. And he wrote for the commentaries and all in the Illinois area. I think that we have to have outside agencies come in. That's the only solution to this thing here.